When Jacob returned to the lobby on the first floor, he saw Elder Liam, Elder Frank, and Elder Kayla standing in the hall. Here outside of the Dragon Palace, Elder Kayla was wearing a long black dress and a blazer, looking professional and beautiful. Standing together, the three of them looked like the figures on the cover of a business magazine. "Elder Frank, Elder Liam, Elder Kayla," Jacob greeted them while he walked towards the gate. "We'll drive you back to your university," Elder Frank said with a gentle smile. "Oh, have you been waiting for me?" Jacob was a little surprised. "Yeah, Elder Liam and I will go to the East and West clans respectfully, and Elder Kayla will return to North Atlantic. We'll drop you off first." Elder Frank nodded and said, since they couldn't fly in the city, they had to travel in a car like ordinary people. Jacob didn't refuse Elder Frank's offer, and followed them out of the building. Their ride was still the spacious and luxurious Bentley. Jacob had noticed that Elder Kayla, Elder Frank, Elder Liam, and General Arthur, who was stationed in the Dragon Palace, were close to each other, and they stood firmly with Draken. Therefore, they were closer to Jacob than the other elders. "I'm afraid the old Dragon King will turn the world upside down this time," Elder Frank said while he drove. "Now we'll have to see how East and West react to the challenge." Elder Liam nodded and said. Elder Kayla frowned, but she remained silent. The times have changed. Without Kenneth, North Atlantic was less powerful than before. Although Darius was fierce, he was old, and the other two clans each had several mid-tier 8th-level cultivators. In the past 200 years, the growth of the Dragon God Shrine has been faster than we expected, and it now has almost the same strength as that of the 4 ocean dragon palaces. If they get involved, the situation will get more complicated, Elder Liam continued. The Dragon Tribe established the Dragon God Shrine after the human cultivators moved to 5th Heaven to prevent making the same mistakes the human cultivators had made. The function of the Dragon God Shrine was to prevent the dragon cultivators from killing each other, and thus allow the human cultivators to defeat them. The main tasks of the Dragon God Shrine were to watch the human cultivator sex on and above 5th Heaven, as well as to regulate the behavior of the dragon cultivators from all the forces. Since the Dragon God Shrine was an organization established by all 5 elemental dragon clans, it would select the best cultivators from the entire dragon tribe. That was why it had grown so fast. In only 200 years, its overall power was equivalent to, if not exceeded, that of the 4 ocean dragon palaces, which had been around for thousands of years. If it intervened in the conflicts between the 4 ocean dragon palaces, the situation would get trickier. "How is Susan's injury?" Elder Frank asked abruptly. "She was not fully recovered yet. By sending Tom here, the Dragon God Shrine intends to keep an eye on our North Atlantic," Elder Kayla finally spoke. In the past, Susan was the inspector of the city, so the North Atlantic Dragon Palace didn't feel that much pressure from the Dragon God Shrine. However, the arrival of Tom cast a shadow on the complicated situation in the city. Everyone, including Jacob, knew that Tom favored the South Atlantic Dragon Palace, which meant that Dragon God Shrine was leaning towards the South Atlantic Dragon Palace as well. However, Darius's return broke this new balance. Right now, the North Atlantic Dragon Clan would take on the East Dragon Clan, the West Dragon Clan, the South Dragon Clan, and even the Dragon God Shrine to fight back. They gave up the option of diplomatic negotiations entirely and went directly to war. The old Dragon King has his plans. Let's wait and see. With that, Elder Kayla closed her eyes and placed her hands together in a cultivation gesture, entering the state of cultivation. She took any time she had to cultivate, even in a car. Her passion for cultivation was almost the same as Susan's. While the car drove forward, Elder Frank and Elder Liam stopped their discussion. After all, they were about to travel to different clans to issue the notice of war, a mission they dreaded. When the car drove into the university, it immediately drew the attention of the passing students. While the students couldn't see through the darkened windows of the car, Jacob, who was sitting in the car, could see their amazed glances. "Elder Kayla, please tell Susan that we all hope that she could return soon. Jacob said to Elder Kayla suddenly. Okay, I'll tell her, Elder Kayla said lightly. Jacob hoped that Susan would come back to teach, although it meant nothing to her. The car stopped at the entrance of the building from before, and Jacob got out of the car. Some students immediately glanced at him. After today's incident, he would be at the center of attention again. Well, whatever. Jacob sighed slightly and waved at the three elders in the car. Jacob wouldn't linger in college at this stage since his goal was to reach the 4th level and even the 5th level. Only after he had become an official inspector would he understand the mysteries of the Dragon God Shrine. He had to appear at the college each day and take classes, telling the world that he was still alive. Otherwise, Sam and others would report him missing to the police. He's the guy that takes Snowflake to the library every day. Right. I didn't know he came from such a rich family, and has a Bentley driving him to and from college. Ooh, I told you that Snowflake is of a precious breed. Some girls gossiped in the shadow of the building while they watched Jacob get out of the car. With his acute hearing, Jacob immediately heard their words. He smiled and ignored them as he walked towards his dorm. I think you should go talk to him if you like him so much. What are you talking about? I just said he was okay. The girls hesitated and then walked towards Jacob. However, when they followed him down the path in the little forest, Jacob had already disappeared. The girls looked at each other, wondering how he could run so fast. Meanwhile, with a red energy sphere around him, Jacob released Snowflake from his necklace and shot towards 5th Heaven on its back. While he went up to 5th Heaven to cultivate, the counterattacks MTX group prepared were unfolding. Returning with Darius was a professional acquisition team that Sophie's second uncle had established overseas. The team was comprised of top experts in acquisition operations, and they could easily destroy the South Atlantic Dragon clan's domestic businesses one by one with the abundant funds they brought with them. The on-land businesses that the South Atlantic Dragon clan had managed for more than 10 years with great effort would be dismantled in a few days. Darius had been a veteran in the international capital market, and he wouldn't show mercy in the first business counterattack after his return. It was night, and the surrounding buildings were all dark. However, MTX Group's headquarters was as bright as day. All the employees were working overtime, cooperating with Darius's team to unleash attacks on Conqueror Group. Meanwhile, on 5th Heaven, Jacob had finished half a day of cultivation. The valley was silent except for the light snoring of Snowflake, who was lying at the entrance of Jacob's cave. Jacob leaped over Snowflake and came down the steep mountain like a martial arts master, leaving no traces behind him. In the fields, the spiritual herbs were growing well. On some of the herb leaves were a tiny layer of condensed dew, and some pretty flower buds were trying their best to absorb the surrounding mist. Light footsteps came from one side of him. Jacob turned and saw Kathy walking from her cave to the field with the night pearl in her hand. Under the warm light of the night pearl, Kathy had a holy aura around her. At the sight of Jacob, she was surprised as well. "You're here too?" she said in a low voice. "Yeah, I came to cultivate." "Did you borrow Noah's flight treasure?" Jacob asked. "Yeah, I didn't want to trouble you and Snowflake every time," Kathy nodded. Jacob knew Noah's treasures were easy to use even with weak cultivation strength. Besides, Noah had rearranged the array formation here. It was easy for him to give Kathy a key to the protective array formation. With the night pearl in her hand, she slowly squatted to check the growth of the spiritual herbs. Obviously, she was also taking a break from cultivating in the middle of the night, and came to check on the spiritual herbs as a way to relax. "Today, someone sent a car to get you. Who was it?" Kathy asked casually while touching a spiritual herb that would curl up its leaves like a mimosa with her finger. "Oh, it was Sophie's grandfather. He returned from abroad and wished to see me," Jacob explained. "Oh, how did the meeting go?" Kathy asked. "It went well," Jacob said with a smile, not giving away any details. "By the way, Noah's in love," Kathy looked back at Jacob and said. Jacob almost choked on his breath.
"What happened?" Jacob inhaled deeply and asked. "I don't know the details. It's just that he wants to buy gifts for a girl in the class next to his, and he looked quite nervous about it, Kathy said. Jacob was speechless. After all, it was quite rare for Noah to offer gifts to someone. He had so many questions, but knew that Kathy wouldn't know anything because Noah would never tell them too much. Well, I'll continue with my cultivation. Soph has reached the Foundation establishment realm. Thank you so much for giving her that pill. Jacob thanked her sincerely. Stomping lightly on the ground, Jacob leaped up over 10 meters with ease before landing on the rocks on the side of the steep hill, and he returned to his cave within seconds. While human cultivators relied on treasures and techniques, the dragon cultivators put more emphasis on physical strength and realms. That was why the dragon cultivators practiced weapons such as swords and spears and learned proficient skills in using them. Thanks to the fundamental boxing techniques, Jacob was now so agile that he could easily leap onto the steep hill. Otherwise, with the range attack method offered by the sword Shadow Scroll, he wouldn't try to temper his body. Chris, the 5th level cultivator who once fought with Jacob, used his physical strength in close-range combat. Fighting only with treasures and powerful techniques from hundreds of meters away was not the battle style of dragon cultivators. That was because the higher realm the dragon cultivators got, the more difficult it would be to break through. They had to increase their combat ability by making use of their great physical strength. When Darius fought in the Great War, he killed dozens of masters in the nascent Soul Realm with his fierceness. Among those cultivators, only a few fought him for several days and nights, and the others were killed by him instantly, with just one attack. He got close to those Nascent Soul Realm cultivators almost instantly, and he broke their defense abruptly and killed them before they could cast any spells or use any techniques. Those Nascent Soul Realm cultivators were not used to such swift attacks, and died in physical combat despite their great cultivation strength. Since Jacob was now in the dragon's circle, he saw Susan, who used a white jade sword, Tom, who attacked him using a golden weaving shuttle, Henry, who fought with him with a long spear, and Elder Frank, who owned martial arts schools. That was why he accepted the practice of both martial arts and nature essence cultivation. After some quick leaps, he returned to his cave before sitting down on the stone bed cross-legged to continue cultivating. With the small cloud rain array in the cave, Jacob could absorb it and turn the essence in the valley into lightning power. When it was not activated, the white and black chess pieces of the array formation that were placed in the stone wall of the cave sparkled like stars. With these sparks, Jacob's cave was lit up and had a mysterious look. Lying at the entrance of the cave, Snowflake was still sleeping. With the abundant nature essence in the valley, it was automatically increasing its cultivation strength while it slept thanks to the demon core in its body. If I can find a proper cultivation technique to nurture the meridians in Snowflake, it will have a faster elevation process, Jacob thought to himself while he looked at Snowflake at the entrance. The sword Shadow Scroll began to circulate essence swiftly in his body. Snowflake lifted its head from its paws and yawned, before rubbing its belly on the floor. Hesitating for a few seconds, it finally flew out of the cave in a crooked line and landed in the spiritual herb garden before leaving a pile of poop in it. Shivering, it immediately flew back to the warmer cave after that. When the sunlight shone into Jacob's cave, a night of cultivation came to an end. Like a white arrow, Jacob flew out of the cave and practiced fundamental boxing techniques in the thick morning fog of the valley. With his 3rd level realm, each of his punches pierced a big hole in the fog. After some kicks and punches, the surrounding fog backed off 10 meters from him. Merging the sword Shadow Scroll into the boxing techniques, Jacob's boxing movements emitted the extra nature essence in his body into the valley. He left distinct footprints in the ground while the rocks under his feet were shattered into dust. Jacob launched another palm strike before withdrawing his stance. The intense fog in the valley was separated in half by 100 meters. He inhaled deeply, feeling the swift recovery of his strength all over his body. After one night of cultivation, he had unlocked several openings, and the number of openings he had in his dragon core now reached 90. Walking to the entrance of her cave, Kathy watched in amazement while Jacob did his morning exercise. Although she didn't understand martial arts, she knew each of his movements contained sword energies, which could wound enemies with its invisible force. These invisible sword energies were more powerful than visible and solid swords. Jacob turned his head and saw Kathy standing at the entrance of her cave. "You're up," Jacob stated in place of a greeting. Yeah, Kathy answered loudly. Last night, she took the last level 4 Foundation Establishment pill, and she would need to make more elixir pills this weekend. As with lightning cultivation, one couldn't make elixirs continuously and must allow the body to rest. With her current realm, the highest grade pills she could make were level 4 elixir pills, which were also the highest grade elixir pills she could take. With this cultivation method, she could achieve a cultivation speed 10 times faster than with the life-death notes. I'm going to head back. Do you want to go with me or stay? Jacob's resonant voice woke up Snowflake, who had been sleeping. With a roll, it returned to Jacob's feet. No, you go ahead. I think I'll stay here for a bit longer, Kathy answered. She walked into the valley, and her eyes lit up. On the edge of the field, a dense golden fruit grew out of the power spirit grass overnight. It was as big as a fist, dangling heavily on the branch with abundant nature essence. Quickly, she plucked the mature power spirit fruit. Holding it in both hands, she said, Jacob, eat it now. What is it? Jacob looked at her in confusion. Power spirit fruit. It can increase your nature essence, and it's a much coveted natural treasure for cultivators who want to elevate their realms. Flushed with excitement, she said, Well, then you should eat it yourself. Jacob pushed her hands back. My realm is too low, so it's useless for me. The mature power spirit fruit can remain fresh for only 1 day, and it will rot tomorrow before falling into the soil. If you don't eat it today, it'll be wasted, Kathy urged him. In fact, she was surprised that the power spirit grass could grow out a power spirit fruit all of a sudden in the fields. Okay, I'll try it. Jacob was reluctant to elevate his realm with elixirs. However, such an ultimate natural treasure would be wasted if he didn't eat it. After taking the fist-sized golden fruit, he peeled it before devouring it in 2 bites. How do you feel? Kathy watched him anxiously. She had only heard about the effects of the power spirit fruit from Noah and didn't know how it worked. There's almost no flavor. The moment Jacob said this, a surge of intense warmth rose in his core. Abundant essence spread through his body while Jacob's dragon core was trying its best to absorb the nature essence. Another 4 openings were unlocked in his body. Jacob's complexion turned from red to golden, then to white. With a bang, abundant nature essence shot out from the top of his head into the valley. With the current storage ability of the dragon core, he could only contain half of the nature essence of the power spirit fruit. His palm released a gray beam of sword energy. It seemed like he had broken through to a higher realm. Seeing Jacob's eyes shining intensely, Kathy knew he had achieved another breakthrough. Looking down at the peel at his feet, Jacob realized that it had merged into the soil without a trace. How do you feel? Kathy asked again, eager to know the effects of the fruit. Huh, very good, Jacob said. Good, Kathy said with relief. Snowflake trotted over and sniffed the root of the power spirit grass, finding that it was a spot where it had conducted its business last night. The ethereal summit is indeed full of essence. Even the power spirit grass has begun to grow fruit, Kathy said happily. It was probably just luck. Anyway, you won't need to worry about the lack of materials for making elixirs in the future, Jacob said. Yeah, Noah will transplant more spiritual herbs in the fields. We'll have a great garden, Kathy said and moved further inside the garden to check on the other plants. Okay, I'll leave now. Let's go, Snowflake, Jacob nudged it. With a roll, Snowflake immediately turned into the snow lion form. It moved the soil around the root of the power spirit grass with its paw to cover its scent. Then, as if nothing had happened, it carried Jacob on its back before shooting out of the ethereal summit down to first heaven with familiarity. With Noah constantly moving all the spiritual herbs from the herb gardens of the sects on fifth heaven, the Herb King Valley will one day become a place that fits its name, Jacob thought to himself. Then his thoughts went to the classes and upcoming tests at his university. He tutored Sophie tirelessly each day while his own studies lagged behind. However, with the Dragon God Shrine's exams drawing near, he had to give up on some of the tests at the university. Well, well, I was wondering where you've been, and here you are, sneaking into fifth heaven. Tom's cold voice suddenly sounded behind Jacob. Snowflake turned abruptly, and Jacob spotted Tom, who was hovering in the high sky. From the look of him, he was taking over Susan's responsibility of patrolling the space below Fifth Heaven and encountered Jacob on Second Heaven. "What do you want?" Jacob clutched Snowflake's fur and looked at Tom calmly. "What do I want?" Tom sneered. "This is beyond the place where mortals can enter. I could punish you for breaking into Fifth Heaven without permission." He had been thinking of a way to take out his revenge on Jacob. However, with Jade and Julia in the school, he hadn't dared to make a move. However, while he was patrolling the gray territory between First Heaven and Fifth Heaven, he encountered Jacob, slipping down from Fifth Heaven. "Is it a crime to enter Fifth Heaven?" Jacob retorted. "I suspect that you're a spy sent by the human cultivators. Come with me to the Dragon God Shrine." Tom's eyes suddenly lit up, while the golden weaving shuttle under his feet arced across the sky and drew out a golden flash. When Tom reached out to grab him, Jacob sat on the back of Snowflake and clapped off his hand immediately. "You dare to resist arrest?" Furious, the golden light in Tom's palm turned white. "Snowflake!" Jacob clenched Snowflake with his legs a little. Snowflake released 5 colored light beams with its paws and fled swiftly. After missing, Tom raced after Jacob. Jacob knew that, as an assisting inspector, he would probably be framed as a spy if he was brought to the Dragon God Shrine. But the precarious situation the North Atlantic Dragon Clan was in, the incident would be a blow to North Atlantic. Although Snowflake's traveling speed was close to that of an Ascent Soul Realm cultivator, Tom was the equivalent of a top-tier Ascent Soul Realm. Fleeing with Jacob on its back, Snowflake began a long-distance race with Tom. "Trying to escape only proves your guilt. Stop running!" The golden weaving shuttle under Tom's feet suddenly shot out. Prepared, Jacob shot out 160 sword energies. Break! With his nature essence, the golden weaving shuttle, which was Tom's natal treasure, blocked and bounced off Jacob's sword energies. Fortunately, Jacob's sword energies were condensed by his nature essence, and were not his natal treasures. Otherwise, he would be splitting out blood from the collision. "Snowflake, go!" he shouted. Snowflake barked anxiously, but it had reached its top speed. After all, it was only a level 2 spirit beast, and couldn't get rid of the 7th level cultivator despite its set of flight treasures. The golden weaving shuttle paused only a moment due to the sword energies that were blocking its path, and it continued to shoot towards Jacob. A surge of nature essence rose suddenly. Standing on top of Noah's flying treasure, Kathy raised her hands and unleashed the life-death notes. The attack from the golden weaving shuttle was suddenly turned towards her. However, she didn't dodge. Instead, she spread her arms and met the attack head-on. "Withdraw," Tom immediately murmured. The golden weaving shuttle shot past Kathy's ear, cutting off some hair. Tom gasped with fear. Kathy had a mark on her that was left by a Grand Master in the Soul Formation realm. If he killed her by accident, that Grand Master would turn him into dust. While the human cultivators and the dragon cultivators were 2 groups that were cautious with each other, the Grand Masters in the Soul Formation realm were the most powerful cultivators standing above both groups. Even the dragon cultivators had to give way to them. After all, no rules applied to truly powerful people. Tom was lucky that the old lady was not in the mortal world. Otherwise, Tom's act of cutting Kathy's hair would be sensed by her, as her spiritual sense enveloped the entire mortal world. In the few seconds that Tom was struck with fear, Snowflake and Noah's treasure flew several miles away. After seeing that Jacob turned in the distance, Tom thought for a moment, and continued with his chase. With Kathy next to Jacob, the situation was a bit tricky, but he didn't want to let go of this perfect chance to catch Jacob. Facing in front of him, Jacob looked back and withdrew hundreds of sword energies, oblivious to the fact that Kathy had blocked the golden weaving shuttle for him. He was wondering why Tom stopped his pursuit. A 3rd-level cultivator could never defeat a 7th-level cultivator. Besides, Tom could launch killing attacks against him in the name of catching a fleeing suspect. The golden light was gaining on Jacob again. Jacob's 160 sword energies formed 2 groups before shooting towards Tom. they gave a severe head-on blow to Tom. Life-death notes. Kathy's clear voice sounded immediately after. Jacob turned towards her voice in surprise. White and black light beams swept the fog and mist on second heaven and engulfed Tom's golden weaving shuttle. Although she had only the cultivation strength of the Chi refinement realm, the life-death notes that her master gave her could unleash the power of the nascent soul realm. Tom was a little alarmed when he could no longer sense his natal treasure. If he was right, Jacob was a third level while Kathy was in the Chi refinement realm. However, he had fallen into their trap. Two groups of sword energy shot towards Tom from both sides. Jacob and Kathy started working together. Meanwhile, Snowflake spat out a fireball towards Tom's chest. It was demon fire containing true flames. In the 5 elements, fire countered metal. To extinguish true flames, one had to use true water, or 10,000-year-old ebony ice. Unprepared, Tom got a streak of his hair and one of his eyebrows burned off. If not for the fact that Snowflake was only a level 2 spirit beast, the fire would have messed with his meridians. Life-death notes. 2 dragon array formation. 3 waves of attacks went at Tom again simultaneously. Without his natal treasure, Tom couldn't keep his balance in the high sky. Unprepared, he was struck by the life-death notes, the equivalent of nascent soul realm force, the sword array, the equivalent of the 5th level force, and the fireball, the equivalent of core formation realm force. Master, good attacks! Cheers from Jade and Julia suddenly sounded near them. As Tom was sent flying in the air by the attacks, he heard the twins and knew that he was defeated. The black and white light rings shot towards Tom from their hands. The golden bell they gave to Jacob was now hanging around Snowflake's neck. Sensing Snowflake's alert state, they could track it down immediately. However, Tom was already surrounded by Jacob's sword array when they appeared. Tom was desperately retreating when his hands and feet were shackled, and his nature essence was pouring out as if a dam was opened. "What are you doing?" Tom shouted in alarm. Just like what he said, this place was beyond mortals' reach, and other cultivators were not allowed to pass it. That was why no one would know what Jacob and the others were doing to him. At this thought, Tom yelled, I'm an inspector." "Inspector? Well, it seems like the rules don't apply to us." Jade and Julia flew to his side while snickering, and each grabbed one of his shoulders. Tom froze. Sure enough, Jade and Julia didn't belong to the dragon tribe, and they were powerful cultivators. "You outnumber me," Tom said as he held an emergency note in his hand. While inspectors were out on duty, they could release an emergency note if they were in great danger. Receiving the notice, the nearby inspectors would come to their rescue, while the signal would also fly back to the Dragon God Shrine. However, on the territory of North Atlantic, the nearby inspectors included the insisting Inspector Jacob, who was standing against him, and the official inspector, Susan. He didn't think Susan would help him. Furthermore, he didn't want the Dragon God Shrine to know about this disgraceful incident. He was angry with himself for underestimating Jacob and falling into the trap. After all, Jacob wasn't so powerful a month ago. "What if we outnumber you?" Jade grabbed his ear and shouted. With nature essence in her hand, her grip on Tom's ear hurt him so much that he grimaced, feeling like his ear was being torn off. Since he became an inspector, or even since his birth, no one had ever grabbed him by the ear. Disgrace. It was an absolute disgrace. "Oh, okay, you want a fair fight?" "I'll give you one." Jade rolled her eyes and said. The outpour of the nature essence from Tom's body suddenly stopped. The remaining nature essence was in the realm of 3rd level, and out of the 300-plus unlocked openings in his Dragon Core, only 90 of them were in working order. "Master, he wants to have a fair duel with you," Jade called out to Jacob. The twins' bracelets expanded and released Tom's body. After gaining his freedom, Tom tried to flee, but was caught single-handedly by Julia and got tossed into the 2 bracelets. The black bracelet stretched vertically and became a circular wall. The white bracelet expanded horizontally and turned into a round platform. Jade and Julia's treasures changed into a battle stage that was hovering on second heaven. Tom was tossed in, dropped onto the platform on his butt. "Master, practice with him," Jade said to Jacob. "Okay." Jacob leaped onto the round platform. It dawned on Tom that Jade and Julia were playing with him, and were using him as a practice target for Jacob. However, he couldn't run away from them. While he was thinking, Jacob shot more than a dozen sword energies towards him. "Here is your treasure." Jade drew out the golden weaving shuttle that was engulfed in the life-death notes and tossed it onto the platform. Meanwhile, Jacob's sword energies were already in front of Tom, cursing silently. Tom had to ignore the dozen or so sword energies and leaped up to catch his natal treasure. Several holes appeared on his body. "You can kill me, but you can't insult me like this." Holding the golden weaving shuttle in front of him, Tom yelled. Standing on the top of the black wall, Julia snickered and said to Jade, "Sister, this inspector is hilarious. A moment ago he was acting like a big bully, and now he's complaining of being outnumbered. He's nothing compared to our master." Jade rolled her eyes again. Degraded to third level, Tom felt uncomfortable with his natal treasure, which was made after he had reached the 5th level. He found it quite energy-consuming when he activated right now. Without treasures, Jacob's sword energies twirled around him, creating wind and blowing his clothes and hair. One was in a terrible situation, but the other looked magnificent. The result of the competition seemed obvious before it even began. Jacob was undoubtedly the strongest cultivator on 3rd level. Cultivating the 5th elemental essence simultaneously, and could construct sword array formations, Jacob was invincible among his peers. Since he had to absorb 5 kinds of essences, it took him 5 times the effort to advance in levels. However, at the same time, his foundation was 5 times as solid as the cultivators who were in his realm. If Jacob was also at the 7th level, he could kill Tom with one attack. Jacob took a step forward abruptly. With only one step, Jacob's fist was already before Tom. He seemed to have covered a long distance with this single step. When he saw Jacob's fist coming towards him like a missile, Tom raised his arms immediately and tried to block the attack. However, Jacob turned in the air and flew over Tom's head, kicking the latter in the back. A green streak of wood elemental nature essence shot out of Jacob's foot, and the strong, piercing force of wood elemental nature essence immediately disturbed the meridians in Tom's upper body. After landing on the platform, Jacob bounced up like on a set of springs before punching at Tom's back with both his fists. Earth elemental nature essence. As if 2 huge iron hammers hit him, Tom immediately stumbled forward more than 10 steps. Jacob didn't have to use his sword array formations. With the fundamental boxing techniques, he forced Tom into submission. While 5 colored light flashed, Jacob's continuous kicks and punches forced Tom into a corner. The black wall suddenly disappeared, and the stage no longer had any protective covers. If Tom took one more step backwards, he would fall down the sky. As he was busy blocking Jacob's attacks, cold sweat broke out all over Tom's body due to the fear. After inhaling deeply, he unleashed a surge of nature essence and released a sharp metal elemental nature essence beam. While Jacob stepped back to dodge it, he instinctively reached out his right hand and caught the beam of metal elemental nature essence. Sword Shadow Scroll. Absorb. He took the nature essence into his body before launching a palm strike towards Tom. Tom took one step forward and smashed the right palm with Jacob's. Almost instantly, the expulsion force Jacob was using became a sucking force, and Tom sensed the nature essence in his body pour into Jacob's right arm. Alarmed, Tom immediately withdrew his arm, not daring to make contact with Jacob. "Bracelet, shrink," Jade shouted. Immediately, the white floor of the competition stage shrunk into a crisscross of lines. With the black outer ring circling the white, intersecting lines, it looked like a giant tennis racket. The thin white lines created many squares with a length of 2 meters. If Jacob and Tom were not careful and stepped into the empty squares, they would fall from second heaven. With sword energies as well as Snowflake protecting him, Jacob wasn't worried. However, cold sweat again broke out all over Tom's body. Jade and Julia looked cute and sweet, but their actions were vicious. Since Tom was now at 3rd level, he could barely use the golden weaving shuttle, let alone fly on it. In short, if he fell, and Jacob didn't catch him, he would die here. Tom was now scared for his life. Jade stood by the stage with clenched fists and yelled, "Mr. Lester, go with your full force." Her so-called encouragement frightened Tom so much that his legs weakened, and he almost fell. Meanwhile, Jacob strengthened his legs and moved his steps carefully. Jacob launched 2 punches at Tom. Faced with severe danger, Tom was forced to block each of Jacob's attacks one by one. After 3 strikes, Jacob bumped his knee against Tom's, and neither of them backed off. They were battling with both physical force and nature essence. "Master's battle instinct is getting better," Julia said with a smile. No, I'll make it more difficult for them," Julia said before snapping her fingers. Then the bracelet that was creating the thin white lines shrunk again, turning into many small white circular platforms that were just enough for a foot to step on. Tom almost cried. With the small circular white platforms at least 2 meters away from each other, it was difficult to get onto them. Furthermore, the small circular white platforms were controlled by the twins, and Tom wondered if the platforms would suddenly disappear while he leapt towards them. While he hesitated for half a second, Jacob's leg, which was empowered by water elemental nature essence, swept towards his shoulder. Tom raised his hands to block it, but he was kicked 2 meters away. He quickly moved his feet and stood on another platform. Although they were both at 3rd level, he was no match for Jacob. With shining eyes, Jacob was treating him as a dummy target. A silent enemy was the worst enemy. As he panicked, Tom didn't notice that his nature essence was recovering, and the openings on his dragon core were refilled. Now he had reached the 4th level, but he still couldn't defeat Jacob, who was at 3rd level. Jacob solidly kicked Tom's chest. The golden weaving shuttle in Tom's pocket dropped, and he reached out trying to grab a nearby platform, but failed. He fell directly towards First Heaven. Jade and Julia moved together. They kept their speed the same as Tom's, watching him from both sides while he fell with his head down. "Help me, please!" Tom yelled. "Sister, he said please." Julia glanced at Jade and said, "Doesn't seem enough," Jade said. "Please, please, please!" Tom yelled again. He was gaining speed in his fall. If he fell below First Heaven, the consequences would be... "Still not enough begging," Jade said in a measured tone. At the same falling speed, they rested their hands upon their chins, seeming to be thinking. "I'll do anything. Just please save me," Tom yelled again. "Will you make trouble for our master in the future?" Jade grabbed his ear and asked. "Never, never." Tom shook his head like a rattle drum. The wind blew around him. At this falling speed, he would surely die if he fell to the ground despite his 4th level cultivation strength. "Did our master come out of 5th heaven?" Julia asked. No, I saw nothing," Tom almost screamed. By now, the boundary of First Heaven could be seen. "You may live, but you will be punished." Julia casually put a red energy sphere around him. Then Jade and Julia stopped descending. 2 seconds later, an earth-shaking sound came from the ground as if a huge crater exploded into a small hill. Then Jade caught the golden weaving shuttle falling from 2nd Heaven. 3 seconds later, Jacob and Kathy came to their side on their respective flying treasures. "Where's Tom?" Jacob asked them. "He'll live, and his cultivation strength will gradually come back." Jade flew to Jacob and waved the small golden weaving shuttle at him. "Reward?" "Well, I'll put it away." Jacob put the golden weaving shuttle into his necklace. For some unknown reason, he felt refreshed all over after the fight with Tom. Jacob's cell phone began to ring. He realized that they were now on First Heaven, and took out his cell phone. "Jacob, your mom, and I will attend an important banquet tonight. You can go home and have dinner with your grandma." Walter's resonant voice came through his cell phone.
"Okay, I got it," Jacob answered.
"Where are you? How come it sounds so windy through the phone?" Walter asked.
I'm behind the library, and there's a vent nearby," Jacob hurried to explain. They were on the top of First Heaven, which was almost 2,000 meters above the ground. With planes coming and going, it was undoubtedly quite windy.
"Anyway, your mom and I won't come back for dinner tonight."
Walter hung up. Jacob put away his cell phone and put up a red energy sphere around him before riding Snowflake towards the university, while Tom climbed out from the crater with a black face. Darius, who was in a suit, was sitting in the armchair in the CEO's office on the top floor of the headquarters of the MTX Group with a cup of coffee in his hand, glancing at the news on Wall Street Journal. The MTX Group's funds were behind some of the recent international financial activities. Since the group went abroad, it had become one of the main forces behind the curtain of the global financial market. It was ridiculous and suicidal for the South Atlantic Dragon Palace to attack the business of the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. After finishing the last page of the paper, Darius tossed it onto the desk and turned to Draken, who was sitting on the couch by the wall. "You've contacted them all?" "Yes, we have," Draken answered. Darius didn't reply. He picked up another newspaper, Economic Times, and began reading. The elders had personally gone out to buy the papers for him, since Darius was used to reading newspapers while drinking coffee each morning. Then a measured knock came from the door, showing that the person on the other side of the door was afraid to disturb Darius. "Come in," Darius said without looking up. Elder Liam and Elder Frank walked in. Darius put the newspaper on his lap and sipped his coffee. "Speak." "Your Majesty, the East Atlantic Dragon Clan took the notice of war and didn't give an answer," Elder Liam said. "Your Majesty, the West Atlantic Dragon Clan also took the notice of war and didn't give an answer," Elder Frank reported. "Okay." Darius nodded with no expression. Elder Liam and Elder Frank exchanged a look while Draken, who was sitting on the couch, had a grim expression on his face. Accepting the notices of war meant that they had taken the challenge issued by North Atlantic. If they sent acceptances of war back in a day or so, the war would begin. However, the notices of war had been issued, and it was impossible to withdraw them. Despite all this, Darius sipped his coffee before lowering his head to continue reading the newspaper. Without further instructions, Elder Liam and Elder Frank stood still. They looked like they were in their 50s and 60s, but their physical strengths were more exceptional than athletes and could stand there all day long. However, the situation. After more than 10 minutes passed, Darius was still reading the newspaper. In the spacious office, the only sound was the rustling of the newspaper. Draken stood up from the couch abruptly and hurried towards the door. "Where are you going?" Darius looked up at Draken and asked. "Father, I need to make arrangements. Since Kenneth is not in the Dragon Palace, I'll lead the chiefs," Draken answered. He sounded a little displeased. He wasn't happy with Darius's iron-handedness and the current attitude. "When did I tell you to leave?" Darius looked at Draken casually and said. Draken refrained from retorting. "Elder Liam, Elder Frank." "Sit down," Darius said to them. The two elders walked to the chairs in the office and sat down uneasily. In fact, they wanted to hurry back to the Dragon Palace to inform people of the situation and get prepared. While time ticked on, Draken was burning with impatience, and the two elders were also fidgeting with unease. Meanwhile, Darius flipped through the newspapers and poured himself another cup of coffee. The sun rose to the top of the sky above the MTX Group's headquarters before descending in the west. Draken didn't move a muscle while sitting in the office for a whole day, and Elder Liam and Elder Frank sat stiffly in their chairs. Darius began to doze off at noon, as if nothing was happening. Cautious knocking sounded at the door. "Come in," Darius opened his eyes and said. A secretary walked in. "Mr. Richards, the Bateman Group called us today. They will resume the oil development project that had been paused last week. They said the funds have arrived and the project can continue. The Vermilion Group called us around the same time and said they would make plans for the new port project that they had put on hold." Draken turned to look at the secretary at the door. "Did they call us on the phone?" "Yes, sir. They called almost at the same time, and I came here to report as soon as I confirmed the information." The secretary answered respectfully. The Bateman Group and the Vermilion Group respectively represented the on-land businesses of the East Atlantic Dragon Clan and West Atlantic Dragon Clan. People in the business circle knew that these two groups were close allies and did things together. In fact, besides their alliance in business, they were also allies in the Dragon Tribe. Different from the North Atlantic Dragon Clan and the South Atlantic Dragon Clan, the two were comparatively weak in strength and wealth, which was why they had allied with each other. Obviously, before the calls, they had consulted with each other. Through their actions, they expressed their unwillingness to be rivals of the North Atlantic Dragon Clan. In other words, they didn't want to get involved in the conflict between North Atlantic and South Atlantic and suffer losses. In the last 2 days, the overseas funds of MTX Group surged in and began acquiring the businesses and companies under Conqueror Group, which were controlled by the South Atlantic Dragon Clan. If the East and West clans continued supporting the South Atlantic Dragon Clan, the fire would soon spread to their territories. The South Atlantic was declining, while the North Atlantic suddenly became tough, willing to wage an official war. In this crucial moment, the two finally understood the situation. Okay, Draken waved his hand. The secretary silently backed out of the office. Elder Liam, Elder Frank, Darius called out. Yes, Your Majesty. Elder Liam and Elder Frank stood up in high spirits. The two of you go to the South Atlantic Dragon Clan immediately, Darius said. The two elders froze and waited for Darius to continue. Send the notice of war to Hank, Darius continued. When Darius was sweeping over the world, Hank was only an errand boy. Hank was proud because he was a powerful senior member of the Dragon Tribe. However, before Darius, the leader of the Dragon Tribe in the Great War several hundred years ago, he was nothing. Yes, Your Majesty. Elder Liam and Elder Frank took the order. In fact, they were surprised that Darius wouldn't stop even though the crisis had ended. He planned to give a heavy blow to the South Atlantic Dragon Clan. With this casual order from Darius, the North Atlantic Dragon Clan and the South Atlantic Dragon Clan had now become official enemies. However, the situation had changed, and Elder Liam and Elder Frank were now confident. They walked out of the office with energy. Well, if Kenneth were here, the situation wouldn't have come to this state, Darius said with a little sigh. Draken stood where he was and remained silent. Although his temperament was different from Kenneth's, they were brothers, and he missed Kenneth very much. He wondered where his brother was. The golden sun was shining brightly in the sky. When the day classes ended, Jacob went back to his dorm to put down his books before meeting Kathy at the girls' dorm and going back home together. Jacob! Are you from a rich family? Ryan chased after him and asked. No, Jacob answered him with exasperation. But that car was so expensive. Hey, we're good buddies. Can I go to your home and have a look? Ryan chased him downstairs and continued. If you go to my home and find out that my parents are Walter and Mila, who come to give lectures in our school, you'll be even more surprised, Jacob thought to himself. He quickened his steps and dashed to the first floor. Wait, why do you run so fast? Are you flying? Ryan steadied himself by holding the wall and couldn't catch up with Jacob. Jacob was dashing out of the dorm building when he saw a huge black object blocking the entrance. In the setting sun, the Bentley looked exceptionally majestic. Jacob stopped running, so he went crash into the door of the Bentley. Prince, you were invited to attend the banquet hosted by the mayor. A middle-aged chauffeur who was wearing white gloves stood beside the car door and said respectfully. Ryan now caught up with Jacob. He only caught the second half of the sentence and his jaw dropped. Who else will attend? Jacob froze for a moment before asking. The old Dragon King and Miss Soph, the chauffeur answered, while slightly lowering his head. Soph was finally released from the Dragon Palace? Jacob thought to himself happily. The banquet will begin in half an hour, so we must hurry, the chauffeur continued. Oh, okay, Jacob nodded. Then he saw Kathy walking towards him with her bag on her back. Jacob strode towards her. Soph's grandfather asked me to attend a banquet. Please tell Grandma that I won't be able to join you guys for dinner. Glancing at the Bentley at the entrance of the dorm building, Kathy smiled and replied, Okay, I'll go back and have dinner with her then. I'll head off then, Jacob turned and asked the chauffeur, "Can you drop her off at my home after driving me to the banquet?" "Yes, I can," the chauffeur answered politely. "Good." Jacob gestured for Kathy to get into the car. Standing at the entrance of the dorm building, Ryan looked at Jacob and Kathy in a daze. Watching the Bentley driving towards the gate of the dorm area, Ryan woke up from his daze. "What kind of person is Sophie's grandfather?" Kathy asked. "Well, he's an old man with great dignity," Jacob answered after a moment of thinking. "Is he also a member of the dragon tribe?" Kathy asked quietly. "Yeah," Jacob nodded and added silently, "a strong man with intense, murderous spirit." "Today I made copies of all the notes of the courses we have together. I've crossed off the unnecessary parts, so you'll pass if you review these notes." Kathy dug out some papers from her bag and showed them to Jacob. "Oh, thanks a lot," Jacob smiled at her. "It's nothing." Kathy shrugged it off. With Kathy, the excellent student, helping him with his final review, Jacob didn't worry about failing the finals. He had more time to cultivate. The car arrived at the entrance of the city hall. Jacob got off the car and asked the chauffeur to drive Kathy home before passing the security check at the gate. Then he walked towards the city hall. The city hall was blazing with bright golden lights. Jacob quickly passed the special security check at the door, since he had nothing on him but his cell phone, keys, and wallet. In the hall, the mayor of the city was warmly greeting high-profile business people, including Draken and Darius. The deputy mayor, Michael's father, was present, but he had no chance to speak at this event. All he could do was smile and greet others. Jacob looked around and saw Walter and Mila surrounded by a group of people in the center of the hall. "Jacob!" a clear voice sounded behind him. Jacob turned and saw Sophie in a long red dress, standing with Helen at the entrance. She gave him a big smile in greeting. "Jacob, here you are," Helen smiled at Jacob. "Yeah, hello, Helen." Jacob hurried to greet her. "Why are you standing at the entrance? Come in with me." Sophie took his wrist and brought him into the hall. Walking on the other side of Sophie, Helen smiled at them. A long red dress and a pair of high-heeled shoes made her look elegant and pretty. Only a few people could attend today's event. Even Michael, the son of the deputy mayor, was not invited. While Jacob and Sophie walked into the hall with the famous architect, Helen, they caught everyone's attention. "That girl is Helen's daughter, and their father's the CEO and chairman of MTX Group." Some businessmen began to talk among themselves. "Who's the young man on the left?" "He seems to be the son of Walter and Mila, but he doesn't like showing his face on public occasions." "Ooh, the two families are very close. When Walter took the position of the head of the Ocean Research Institute, Draken donated a fortune as its research fund. They must have known each other before that." A few days ago, when MTX Group was in a crisis, Walter called his friends to help the group out of difficulty. It seems that the Conqueror Group has somehow offended MTX. The past couple of days, MTX Group has brought back an acquisition team from Europe, and it's been trying everything to cut off the business chain of Conqueror Group. It's at the request of MTX Group that the mayor hosted this banquet, and the aim is to restore the influence and reputation of MTX Group in the region. Ooh, I think Conqueror Group is no match for MTX Group. We'd better stand with MTX Group, or we'll be bought off by them one day," one of the businessmen said cautiously. While they were talking, Helen took Jacob and Sophie to Draken and Darius. "Grandpa!" Sophie looked up and greeted Darius in a low voice. After his return from abroad, Darius had been staying in the MTX Group's headquarters day and night, issuing orders. At the same time, Sophie was grounded in the Dragon Palace. This was the first time that the grandfather and granddaughter met. "Soph?" Darius replied coldly. Darius didn't show any fondness towards Sophie, who was almost 1,000 years younger than him, and even lost her natal dragon core. Discouraged, Sophie stepped back to stand behind Helen. Seeing Jacob and Sophie's arrival, Walter and Mila disengaged themselves from their acquaintances and walked towards Helen and her group. "Good evening, guys." Helen stepped forward to greet them. In her beautiful dress and matching piece of jewelry, Helen looked very elegant. Good evening, Helen. Mila nodded at Helen politely and greeted them with a smile. This is my father, Darius, Draken introduced his father. Nice to meet you. Walter reached out his right hand graciously. As one of the significant figures who were behind the scenes in the European financial market, Darius looked dignified, even when he remained silent. He lifted his hand and shook hands with Walter. This mortal is quite extraordinary, Darius thought to himself after seeing Walter not being suppressed by his aura. He looked towards Mila, who was standing by Walter's side, and found her also quite unique, with her bright eyes and elegant temperament. At this moment, another guest walked in. It was the world-famous painter Tom, who was dressed in a quirky purple suit. There were a 3-centimeter-long scar on Tom's left ear, yet because of his long hair, the injury wasn't noticeable. Mr. Lester, the mayor quickly greeted Tom. If Walter and Mila were known as the leading figures in the science community, then Tom would be known as the most significant person in the art community. Leaders and talented people were needed to develop a city's economy and reputation. Therefore, it was a must for the mayor to greet Tom personally, because of the latter's popularity within the art community. Tom cracked a charming smile as he shook the mayor's hand. However, his wound hurt a little as he smiled. This Tom, didn't he become the head of the arts program in your university? Walter asked Jacob. Yeah, Dad. You know him? Jacob asked. Not really. I have seen him a few times before at a few events. There was one time when your mom and I received an award overseas. He was one of the guests, Walter said. There's no need to get too close to him, Jacob advised immediately. Because of Walter's status, he would definitely be able to meet people like Tom. In turn, Tom could also get in touch with Walter in some ways. At this moment, Jacob worried about Tom getting close to his family. However, Jacob was also confident that if Tom dared to harm his family, even if the Dragon God Shrine were supporting the inspector, he would not hesitate to eliminate him. This man is very talented, but we are in two different circles after all, Walter smiled. Although he had friends who were in the art circle, he had no intention of getting close to Tom. I have been to his art exhibition once. A few of his paintings are quite unforgettable, Mila said. Mila, you like paintings as well? Helen asked with a smile while she took a glass of red wine from a passing waiter. Sometimes. I usually just go and see them when I get tickets for my friends. Helen, you should care about arts more than I do, right? Mila tilted her head a little bit and asked Helen. Since Mila decided to stay in the city, the relationship between the two moms became closer and closer. They even regretted not meeting sooner. While the two of them were talking to each other happily, Walter and Draken started talking about the developments of their career and businesses. Sophie and Jacob looked at each other. Sophie was hungry, so she held Jacob's arm and headed to the food area to get something to eat. The big boss of MTX Group, Mr. Richards. After some small talk with the mayor, Tom smiled and walked towards Draken. Draken was a well-respected man in the city, and Tom was also considered an important figure in the city. Since Tom was also an inspector, Draken couldn't offend him openly. Therefore, Draken reached out and pretended to be nice. Mr. Lester, I've heard so much about you. I must say that your business is growing bigger and bigger. I haven't had the time to visit you since I came to the city. Tom shook Draken's right hand with both of his hands as he appeared to be very sincere. Oh, and this must be the widely known Mr. and Mrs. Brown, Tom said as if he was surprised to see Walter and Mila next to Draken. Hello, Walter reached out his hand. Jacob, who was watching them from far away, looked at Tom vigilantly. If Tom tried to do anything harmful to Walter, Jacob would attack immediately. Fortunately, Tom only shook Walter's hand casually, and then let go immediately. However, the inspector immediately saw Jacob's nervousness. Jacob clenched his fist instantly. He saw the threat and mockery in Tom's eyes. Suddenly, a heavy and sharp force flew past Walter. Tom, who just shook Walter's hand, suddenly took 5 steps back. Also, a champagne tower 10 meters away from Tom shattered and collapsed. The sudden change shocked everyone in the banquet hall. "It's okay, it's nothing, just an accident." The mayor, who oversaw the event, immediately raised his arms and yelled. With the arrival of the cleaners, the banquet hall quieted down slowly. "Mr. Lester, nice to meet you." Darius's cold and harsh voice suddenly appeared next to him. Tom looked at white-haired Darius. Suddenly, a chill struck his spine. "Based on that force, Darius could have killed me instantly." Tom immediately made the correct judgment. "Mr. Lester, are you okay?" Walter asked. "Nothing, I'm okay. I slipped," Tom said while he was wiping the sweat off his forehead with a tissue. He was planning to get some information from North Atlantic by attending this event. However, he was deterred by Darius. If he were to act rashly at this event, the old Dragon King would strike without hesitation. At this moment, Sophie held a plate full of fresh strawberries as she walked around the puddle of champagne and headed towards them with Jacob. Tom took a closer look at Sophie and almost doubted his own eyesight. How come this Sophie, who lost her dragon core, suddenly has the aura of a cultivator? And it seems like she's reached the Foundation establishment realm, he thought. Within a few days, 85 openings turned into 98 openings. Not bad, Darius said flatly. Tom looked at Sophie and then at Jacob, who was next to her. Finally, he understood the situation. With the time of a few days, Jacob's Dragon Core had obtained several more openings. What a terrifying rate of progress. After Draken heard Darius's comment, he was stunned as he looked at Jacob as well. Darius had been cultivating for over 1,000 years and had reached the top-tier 8th level. It was a piece of cake for him to see through Jacob's cultivation progress. What, into 98? Mila asked Helen quietly. It's some sort of index. Helen didn't know how to explain it either. Mila nodded and didn't ask further. On the other hand, Tom, who remained standing in the same spot, suddenly understood everything. Darius thought highly of Jacob's potential, and that was why he decided to protect the latter at all costs. He was giving Tom a warning when he unleashed that violent force. Jacob is a part of North Atlantic, including his family. They are all under the protection of the clan. Whoever dares to harm Jacob and his family will face only one thing: death. That was the message Darius was conveying. Tom quickly took a few steps back and held his own hands awkwardly. I have some friends over there. Excuse me. He quickly walked to the corner of the banquet hall. He was staggering a little. This Tom, what a nuisance, Sophie muttered as she lifted the plate to Jacob's face. Here, have some strawberries. I picked them out, and they're all very sweet. Jacob smiled as he picked one off the plate. Then she took a gorgeous turn and walked to Walter and Mila. Mr. and Mrs. Brown, have some strawberries. Ha, you're so sweet, Soph. Walter patted Sophie's head as he was delighted. Jacob smiled and rolled his eyes at Sophie's innocent act. Mila started to like Sophie more and more as her eyes filled with joy. Jacob, do you want to come and learn something at my studio this weekend? Helen suddenly asked Jacob. I'm quite busy recently. Jacob was about to reply before Mila suddenly interrupted. He won't be able to go this weekend because Walter's planning to take him and Soph on a little trip. Walter smiled and nodded. He wanted to spend some more time with his son, and inviting Sophie along had only seemed natural. They hadn't even told Jacob about this plan yet. Since we're all talking about this, I still haven't thanked you for letting Jacob learn at your studio, Mila continued. Not a problem. Jacob's very talented. He will do great in the future, Helen kindly replied. Soph is great too, and Noah is so lively. The two mums complimented each other's kids one by one, while Walter looked at Jacob with an expression full of mirth. On the other hand, Jacob looked away and saw Sophie devouring the delicious food on the other side of the room. He couldn't stop himself from smiling at how adorable she looked. Where is Noah, by the way? Mila, who was happily chatting with Helen, suddenly asked. Noah? Jacob asked, surprised. Yeah, your dad picked him up from school, and I brought him along, Mila replied. Jacob's eyes immediately scanned the room and noticed a little girl who was dressed in a school uniform and standing beside the mayor. The boy, who was also dressed in a school uniform and stood beside her, was Noah. The little girl was cute and quiet. At a young age, she already gave people the feeling that she was a girl from a rich family. "Who's that little girl?" Jacob asked Mila immediately. "Oh, that's the mayor's daughter, Anna. She goes to the same school as Noah, and she happens to be in the class that was beside him. Because her dad is close to the mayor, he conveniently brought her along as well." Mila looked towards where Jacob pointed and replied, "Oh." Jacob immediately felt like something was stuck in his throat. Noah was trying to stay close to the little girl, yet that girl was keeping a distance from him and stood quietly beside her dad, the mayor. Clearly, Noah was trying to befriend her. Although Anna is very quiet, she is already a pro at playing the piano. She can also play the violin, dance, draw. She can almost do everything, Mila said. Jacob then looked past the kids and saw the vice principal of the university, Liam, appearing at the front door. Liam looked around a few times before immediately rushing in Jacob's direction. He approached Draken and said something quietly. Draken's expression instantly changed. Since Jacob was standing near Draken, he was able to hear Liam's words. The message that turned Draken's face pale was, the South Atlantic Dragon Clan had officially declared war. Without the support of the two prominent allies, East and West Atlantic, along with the turning of the other small dragon clans, the South Atlantic Dragon Clan was left with no room to retreat. Draken didn't want to start a war. All he could do was deliver this message to Darius. Yet Darius's facial expression did not change a bit, as if he knew this was going to happen. He nodded slightly. "Vice Principal Liam, how come you're late?" The mayor, who was busy greeting the guests, walked over immediately. The cute little girl Anna followed her dad and walked over, followed by Noah. "My apologies. I was quite busy today. That's why I'm a bit late," Liam smiled and replied. Publicly, the MTX Group was the biggest donor to their university and held a seat on the board of directors of the college. Therefore, it was normal that Liam was close to Draken. "How come Mr. Frank is still not here?" the mayor asked Liam. The mayor was talking about Elder Frank, who was also the boss of Starlight Hotel and the founder of a chain of martial arts academies that had spread across the world. People who were in this upper-class circle knew that Liam and Frank were good friends. Also, both of them were close to the CEO and chairman of MTX Group, Draken. Many buildings at the university were built and funded by MTX Group, and Frank's martial arts academies and hotels were seemingly financed by the MTX Group as well. Frank has to deal with some urgent matters. It seems that he won't be able to make it today," Liam replied. "Oh, that's unfortunate. Vice Principal Liam, please, enjoy yourself to the fullest." The mayor raised a glass of wine at Liam, smiling. As the mayor slowly walked away, Anna, who was holding a can of Sprite, followed and walked away. Noah, holding a glass of water, followed behind as well. Elder Frank has returned to the North Atlantic Dragon Palace to deploy troops for battle. Liam moved closer to Draken and said quietly after the mayor walked away. Of course, Walter and Mila weren't going to find out about what Liam and Draken were discussing. They held each other's hands and greeted other people they knew in the banquet hall. Of course, the South Atlantic Dragon Clan is going to react like that, Darius said firmly. Liam immediately looked towards the old Dragon King, and Jacob's attention was engaged as well. "I have captured Hank's grandson, Henry," Darius said slowly. Draken, Helen, Liam, and Jacob looked at Darius in shock. Sophie was the only one that continued to eat whatever she had come back with this time. Then she saw everyone's stunned expression and didn't know what was going on, since she didn't hear what Darius said. "I will lock him in our palace, and then attack the South Atlantic with 10 times the force," Darius said calmly. The South Atlantic Dragon Clan placed Henry in their city simply to anger the North Atlantic Dragon Clan. With Darius's temper, he would not allow that to happen. With the Crown Prince in Darius's hands, the South Atlantic Dragon Clan only had 2 choices: surrender or war. In the past, It was the South Atlantic that secretly bullied the North Atlantic. Since the tables had turned, the North Atlantic was explicitly targeting the South Atlantic, and there was nothing they could do about it. With the support of the East and West Atlantic, Hank placed Henry in the enemy's territory and thought that the North Atlantic wouldn't dare to do anything about it. Unexpectedly, Darius returned to the country. Essentially, the South Atlantic just sent a captive to them for nothing. Draken couldn't be compared to Darius in terms of dominance and determination. Within one day, the East and West Atlantic dragon clans were forced to back off. One day later, a full-scale war was declared against the South Atlantic. At that very moment, Jacob admired Darius greatly. This old man dares to do anything, even locking up Henry and testing South Atlantic dragon clan's limits. But Helen was concerned. Our clan suddenly detained their prince, who was studying, in our city? It sounds a bit, not right. Darius didn't reply, and walked towards the front door. An awkward expression immediately appeared on Helen's face. What's going on with Henry? Sophie looked up and asked Helen. He's locked up by your grandfather, Helen tried to say calmly. Yeah, that's great. That jerk should be locked up. After hearing the news, Sophie was thrilled and had to refrain from throwing her hands in the air in victory. When she returned to school today, she was furious to find that Henry had been transferred back to her school. In addition, he went to her class, asked her about the engagement in front of everyone, and triggered heated discussions in other nearby classes. She had no choice but to use the strength of her Foundation establishment realm and throw pencils at him, forcing Henry, whose cultivation progress was destroyed, to retreat. Just when Sophie started worrying about being bothered by Henry in the future, her grandfather captured him. How could she not be thrilled about it? Compared to Henry, Jacob was a caring and kind guy who always made her happy. I just talked to Mila. You should go back with Jacob tonight, Helen said to Sophie. But, Mom... Sophie didn't know how to feel about it. She had just returned home this morning. Walter will take you guys on a small trip tomorrow, Helen continued. Oh, Sophie's expression changed. That would be nice. In reality, Helen wanted Sophie to stay at Jacob's place not only because of the trip, but mainly because Draken and she had to go back to the Dragon Palace to maintain and control the overall situation. They could not leave Sophie in an empty house, and didn't want to bring her back to the Dragon Palace. Sophie never liked the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. Also, since the war was coming, the palace would most likely be one of the main battlefields where the South Atlantic Dragon Clan could send their armies. Jacob, if you have nothing to do here, you and Sophie can go back first, Helen said. Sure, Jacob replied immediately. If it weren't because of Darius sending a car to pick him up from school, he would never attend these kind of events. The reason why Darius wished to see him was probably that he wanted to see Jacob's cultivation progress. They said their goodbyes and left soon after. Hey, slow down! Since Sophie was wearing high heels and a long dress, she wasn't able to walk fast. She couldn't help but yell at Jacob, who walked directly out the door. Jacob looked back and watched her struggle, so he went back towards her and put an arm around her shoulders to keep her steady. There, he said. You won't fall now. Sophie opened her mouth to say something, most likely a retort, but then changed her mind at the last moment and leaned on him more for support. Did you put makeup on? Jacob looked down at her and asked. Makeup? Never. Sophie wrinkled her nose and broke free from Jacob's arm before she got in the taxi they found outside the hall. Wow, she's even more beautiful than before. Is it because she started cultivating? Jacob couldn't help but smile. He then got in the taxi and gave the driver his address. The taxi was driving towards a house by the sea. Under the streetlights that were flashing by, Sophie looked like the most exceptional sculpture, created by the most talented artists. There was not a single flaw with her perfect facial features. Did Grandpa say anything to you? Sophie suddenly turned her head. He seemed fine, Jacob replied. What do you mean by fine? Was he mean to you? Sophie continued to ask anxiously. He was all right, really, Jacob replied, looking out the window. He didn't want to tell her that her grandfather had threatened to kill him on their first meeting. That seemed to calm her down and said, "He's like that all the time, mean to everyone. I have to visit him in the UK every summer, but honestly, I'm a little scared of him." "He's just like your uncle," Jacob said. "Uncle Kenneth is not mean." Mentioning this, Sophie looked out the window and murmured, "I don't know where he is right now." As Sophie started missing her uncle, Jacob suddenly missed Kenneth as well. Under First Heaven, perhaps there was only two people who practiced the Sword Shadow Scroll. One of them was Jacob, and the other was Kenneth. "If my uncle were here, he wouldn't have let Dad ground me like that," Sophie added sadly. "But that's okay. Grandpa must have locked Henry in a cell inside the Dragon Palace. I should go there and mess with him when I have the chance. Life is still fun after all." Sophie suddenly became cheerful again. Jacob was completely lost in his thoughts by now. He suddenly felt like his future would be miserable if he didn't start speeding up his cultivation progress. When the cab drove along the road by the ocean, the rain suddenly surged from the black shoreline towards the beach. Sophie, who was staring at the view outside of the car, was startled and moved closer to Jacob. The raindrops fell on top of the cab loudly. The humid air became cooler with the arrival of the storm. After several clear days, a sudden storm broke the pattern. While the storm raged above the ocean, hidden currents were surging under the surface. Grand Master Hank, leading 100,000 soldiers, charged towards the North Atlantic Dragon Palace. With the arrival of Darius, the East and the West Atlantic Dragon clans withdrew their support, and Hank thought about backing off as well. However, after North Atlantic caught Henry, Hank had no choice but to fight. Darius was obviously forcing the South Atlantic Dragon clan into war. Henry was a rare cultivation genius of the South Atlantic. However, a mysterious master attacked him and damaged his dragon core, making him unable to cultivate anymore. Despite all this, he was still the heir of the royal family of the South Atlantic Dragon clan. It was just like the case with Draken. He didn't have a high cultivation strength, but still could control the North Atlantic Dragon clan. After all, cultivation strength wasn't the critical factor in deciding a person's status in terms of inheritance. Since dragons had long lives, they tended not to give birth to many offspring to avoid future conflict. That was why Darius only had 3 sons, even though he was more than 1,000 years old. Hank only had 1 son, who died in an accident a few years ago, so his direct heir was his grandson, Henry. In the South Atlantic Dragon clan, Hank was the only dragon king, while Henry was the crown prince. They didn't have a dragon king. Hank had been waiting for Henry to get to a mature age before putting him on the throne. Now that Henry was captured, the lifeline of the South Atlantic Dragon clan was held in the hands of the North Atlantic Dragon clan. As a fierce and decisive man, Hank immediately made his decision. Fight. While the 100,000 soldier troop marched towards the North Atlantic Dragon's palace, the minor forces along the way quickly moved away to clear their path. By the seashore, Jacob and Sophie's cab arrived at Jacob's home. After paying the cab driver, Jacob dashed towards the house while pulling Sophie behind him. They were only a few steps from the door. However, in the few seconds that Jacob took to dig out his keys to open the door, the pouring rain soaked them. When Jacob finally opened the door, Sophie dashed into the house, thoroughly drenched. Like a small bird seeking shelter in its nest, she shook her dress and hair to get rid of the excess water. "Soph, is that you?" Grandma's gentle voice sounded from the living room. Jacob looked over and saw Grandma comfortably watching the television with Kathy sitting beside her. "Grandma, I'm soaked." At the sight of Grandma, Sophie began to complain. Looking at Sophie's pink face, Grandma couldn't help but laugh. She asked Kathy, who was by her side, "Kathy, do you have a change of clothes for Sophie?" "Yes, Grandma." Kathy went to her room and took out a set of dry clothes for Sophie. "You can change in my room," Kathy said to Sophie. Thanks," Sophie answered awkwardly before heading upstairs. "There's a trip tomorrow, right? Is that why Sophie is staying the night in our home?" Grandma asked Jacob. "Yeah, Grandma, but I don't know about tomorrow's weather yet," Jacob said. "Tomorrow will be a sunny day," Grandma comforted him. Kathy's door opened, and Sophie walked out in Kathy's pajamas. Since she was shorter and one size smaller than Kathy, the difference was shown in the clothes she wore. "Come here, Soph," Grandma beckoned to her. It always warmed Jacob's heart to see how much his grandma adored Sophie. In the loose pajamas, Sophie staggered into Grandma's arms, staying close to feel warmer. Lovingly, Grandma caressed her hair and asked Jacob, "How come Noah's not back yet?" "Oh, he will return with Mom and Dad. Sophie and I came back before the event ended," Jacob said. Since Noah came to live in their home, Grandma loved him as a second grandson. Jacob wondered if she'd tell her about Noah's crush on a girl. "That kid loves to go out and play. I'll call Walter to ask him to return as soon as they can. After all, it's storming and anything could happen," Grandma said. "Grandma, it's late. I'm going back to my room for the night." Kathy slowly stood up and said to Grandma. She felt like she was intruding on a moment there and wanted to get away. She knew that Jacob's grandmother was a very loving woman, and she showed immense affection to everyone she met. But the bond she had with Sophie was just something else. "Calling the night so early?" Grandma held Kathy's hand. "I still need to do some reviewing for the finals," Kathy answered. "Oh, okay. Good night, Kathy." Grandma smiled at her sweetly. After Kathy called it a night, Jacob and Sophie sat there with Grandma, talking to her and telling her about their respective schools. Grandma wanted to stay up and wait for Walter, Mila, and Noah to get back, but when they didn't return even half an hour later, she decided to head to bed. "Sophie, you can sleep in Kathy's room. I did not sleep well recently and need to sleep alone," Grandma continued. Even though she was unwilling to share a room with Kathy, Sophie didn't want to say no to Grandma. Both of them watched silently as Grandma headed to her room. "I'll sleep with you." The moment Grandma entered her room, Sophie immediately turned to Jacob and said, "Oh, yeah, of course," Jacob answered, already expecting it. It was storming tonight, so it was not safe to go to Fifth Heaven. After all, heavenly lightning was the most dangerous thing to cultivators. Even ordinary lightning posed the same danger. Jacob opened his door, and Sophie immediately walked in and opened the window. The boundless black sea entered her sight, and the chilling air surged in, making her shiver all over. "Are North Atlantic and South Atlantic going to start a war?" Sophie quickly shut the window and asked Jacob. "I don't know." Jacob walked over to shut the curtains. "My mom let me live in your home. That means something's not right," Sophie continued. A worried expression appeared on her face. Jacob looked at her and realized that she was not as carefree as she seemed. Seeing her helpless expression, Jacob sighed. Living in a wealthy and influential family could ensure one's happiness. Sophie's behavior in front of people was a result of her troubled mind. She didn't like Darius because she knew he would declare war, putting her parents in danger. Remembering Helen's attitude towards him, Jacob began to understand that she was preparing a plan B for Sophie by getting her to marry Jacob. The North Atlantic Dragon Clan looked magnificent, but it had its own problems. After hundreds of years of peace in the world of cultivation, maybe one day Sophie could quit being a dragon and live a happy, ordinary life, far from the danger and the trouble. "This is the boundary." Crawling under the quilt, Sophie said as she drew a line on it. "This," Jacob was about to tell her that he would take out another quilt when someone knocked on the door. Jacob opened the door and found it was Grandma in her pajamas. Grandma froze for a moment when she saw Sophie in Jacob's bed, patting the spot beside her. However, Grandma quickly woke up from the shock as she said to Jacob in a loud voice, "Your dad called just now. They were trapped in a landslide." "What?" Jacob's eyes widened, and he asked Grandma immediately, Where are they trapped?" In recent years, to develop the tourism industry, the city repaired the district near where Jacob's home was each year. The seaside road was well maintained. The hills facing the road were reinforced each year. That was why landslide had never happened in recent years. He's still on the line. Talk to him." Grandma put the cell phone into Jacob's hand. "Hello? Hello?" Jacob yelled anxiously into the phone. "Jacob, we're fine. Don't worry. The landslide happened ahead of us and blocked our way. We've called for help, but We'll have to wait for a while due to the storm. You should go to bed early. We're safe in the car. Walter's voice sounded over the phone. Are there any cars behind you? Jacob asked immediately. No, it's late. Few cars are driving on the road this time. Besides, I hear that there are smaller landslides on other sections of the road as well. I guess they're trapped the cars behind us. Don't worry. The car has lots of gas. The air conditioner is in good order, Walter said. Jacob thought for a few seconds with the cell phone in his hand. If it had been any other time, Jacob wouldn't worry. However, the North Atlantic Dragon Clan and the South Atlantic Dragon Clan were officially entering a war today. The more he thought about it, the more worried he got. After pushing the cell phone into Grandma's hand, he said, I'll drive over and take a look. Jacob, I'll go with you. Grandma grabbed his hand and said anxiously. She scolded Walter for this and that regularly, but she was the most anxious one when he was in danger. Grandma, you should stay at home. I'll go alone. Jacob convinced Grandma to stay in her room. I'll go as well. A clear voice sounded behind him. In her pajamas, Sophie got out of bed and shouted at Jacob. She looked anxious, obviously worried about Walter and Mila's safety. All of you stay at home. Jacob picked up the keys and dashed to the stairs. However, Sophie put her slippers on and followed him downstairs. Ignoring her, Jacob opened the door and dashed to the garage in the downpour. Sophie ran out after him. What are you doing? Jacob turned his head and glared at her. I'm going with you. Sophie looked determined as the rain soaked her clothes. Frowning, Jacob rushed back into the house and pulled the jacket from the closet behind the door. After throwing the jacket over her shoulders, he dashed to the garage again. Sophie froze for a moment before kicking off her slippers and running towards the garage with her bare feet. What's happening, Grandma? Kathy's voice came from the house. Kathy, please stay home with Grandma, Jacob shouted after empowering his voice with his natural essence before driving the red Ferrari out of the garage. Afraid that the South Atlantic Dragon Clan schemed to split them, he asked Kathy to stay and guard the house. While the car dashed out of the neighborhood, Jacob released Snowflake from his necklace. On its white neck hung a dazzling golden bell, and Jacob used it to send a message to Jade and Julia, asking them to come and guard the villa. Since Noah lived in the house, he must have placed some powerful array formations around it. However, since he was now with Walter and couldn't manage the array formations himself, the power of the array formations was limited. Splashing through the puddles, the Ferrari dashed towards the seaside road. With driving skills as excellent as Walter's, and reflexes that improved after cultivating the Sword Shadow Scroll, Jacob was able to control the car excellently. Like a flash of red light, the car flew across the road. Sophie lost her grip on the handle of the door, and she fell into Jacob's arms upon a sharp turn. It's not too late for you to go back, Jacob said, stepping hard on the gas pedal. He didn't mean to be rude to her, but at this moment he was already too worried about his parents' safety and what he might encounter when he gets to them. Having Sophie with him outside the safety of his house, now he was worried about her as well. He couldn't let her get hurt. Her protection was his duty. No, Sophie said as she bit her lip. She was worried about Walter and Mila's safety. After all, her parents had the protection of the troops of the North Atlantic. But Walter and Mila were just mortals. She didn't want Jacob's parents to be hurt in the conflict between the dragon clans because of her. Her fingernails cut into her palms, leaving deep marks. The car sped up on the straight road even more. The dark clouds hovered low in the sky and stretched across the shoreline, running hundreds of miles. In the dark night, Jacob saw several purple light beams flashing in the distant sky. Snowflake! Jacob yelled. Snowflake leapt up, turning into a snow lion form. With the forward momentum of the car, it flew up into the sky. Jacob stepped on the brake abruptly, and the Ferrari immediately slowed down on the slippery road. Move! Jacob grabbed Sophie's arm with one hand. While the car slowed down, he leapt up by kicking his right foot slightly on the steering wheel, jumping onto Snowflake's back. Jacob's movements were smooth and efficient. Speed up! Jacob applied more force to Snowflake with his legs. Then Snowflake kicked hard with its paws and flew high up over the hill quickly. Sophie found herself being clenched onto Jacob's body tightly, as if Jacob was holding onto her for his dear life. When she looked up, she saw his determined expression in the pouring rain. Jacob's clothes and hair were soaked, and they stuck to his body. However, in the lightning flashes of the storm, he looked quite heroic. The purple flashes floated and dashed out in the distant sky. With Sophie in his arms, Jacob concentrated all his attention on scanning the road and searching for the white Ford in the storm. "Snowflake, southwest," Jacob yelled. With 2 chirps, Snowflake flew swiftly in the southwest direction. A dark red energy sphere was there in the stormy night, and inside the energy sphere was Walter's white Ford. Sitting in the car, Walter and Mila were talking while listening to music, oblivious to the red energy sphere around them. It was clear that Noah created the energy sphere. Jacob found Noah quite honorable since he stayed with Walter and Mila and protected them, when he could have easily just saved himself. "That's them!" Sophie yelled in excitement. Sitting in the car, Mila and Walter couldn't hear her yells or see them in the high sky. They were animatedly discussing something. 3 purple nets suddenly shot towards Jacob and Sophie from 3 directions. Alerted, Snowflake immediately retreated at the sight of the nets. However, another purple net appeared behind it. Ambush. Jacob had a bad feeling about this. The landslide was only baiting, and the prey was Jacob, who would definitely come out to search for his parents. Jacob released all 160 sword energies. The sword energies collided with the nets, making metallic noises. However, the sword energies couldn't break the nets, and many of the sword energies dashed past the nets through the holes in them. 2 dragons array formation. Jacob's sword energies immediately formed 2 tornadoes. Like 2 intertwining dragons, the 2 tornadoes pounced at the crack between the nets, breaking an opening. Having stayed with Noah for a long time, Snowflake learned some things from him. Immediately, it carried Sophie and flew out of the broken crack Jacob had created. Then it fled towards the east. When it flew with full force, even an Ascent Soul Realm cultivator couldn't catch up with it. The purple flashes chased after Snowflake immediately. Obviously, Sophie was also the target on top of Jacob. Jacob was sure that the trap was set by the cultivators from the South Atlantic Dragon clan. They are still afraid of Noah, who had burned half of their palace, not daring to make a move against him. They're trying to lure me out with a trick of a landslide. If Noah weren't in the car, they would have made a move against my parents. At this thought, Jacob was burning with rage. Silver lightning energy crackled like crazy all over his body. Lightning could break anything made of the 5 elements. The current Jacob was no longer the same Jacob who had just reached the 3rd level.